I want to welcome you all to the Chabad Aspen JCC and welcome you to one of our numerous excellent presentations during the year, but concentrated in the summertime. And if you get yourself one of the brochures in the back or out in the hall or downstairs, you will get a full listing of the kind of events that we offer during the summer. And these are not slouch events. These are important people we bring in, and people who are thank you, people who are influential, people who are fascinating. And as an example, just to show you what we have coming up this week, this coming Tuesday at 5 o'clock, we are bringing in two people from Israel. This is a schlep, remember that. Two people from Israel. The first one is Eve Harrow, who lives in Efrat, a settlement, so-called, of about 40,000 people with modern buildings and everything else, who will talk about the West Bank. What is this West Bank? What is Judea and Samaria? What is Area A or Area B or Area C? None of you understand that. And it's very helpful to hear from her what the reality is. Following her will be Itamar Marcus. Itamar Marcus hasn't done very much in his life. He only set up the Palestine Media Watch. What is that? He takes everything that is said in the Palestine areas by the Palestinian leadership to their people, including what's on television, what is taught in the schools, and translates it from the Arabic into the English. Because what they say to their own people is very different from what they broadcast to the West and to the Western media. And this has done an incredible job, because just this past 6 weeks, both Denmark and Norway, who have been strong supporters financially of the Palestinian leadership, has stopped paying them. And they've stopped paying them because of the truth coming out about paying terrorists and so forth that he single-handedly worked with. So the two of them will give a talk on Tuesday. We'll then interview them a little bit and get some questions from the audience as well. There's no charge for this. We are going to hold a small dinner afterwards that you're welcome to come to if you talk with me, and that's Tuesday. Wednesday at 8 o'clock, there's a movie that will benefit Golshem L'Chaim, which is Ski for Life. Remember, each winter, towards the end of February to the beginning of March, we bring in disabled Israeli vets, and we teach them to ski. And I have to tell you what it feels like working with these vets who have had horrendous injuries, who when they finish the week and they're skiing, say to us, "I can do anything now." And it really gets you verklempt like I'm getting right now. Anyway, the movie is to benefit Golshem L'Chaim. It's called On the Map. It's the story of the Israeli basketball team winning the European Championships a number of years ago. And the $25 ticket price for that goes directly to Golshem L'Chaim. And then finally on Monday, the 31st of July, at 5 o'clock, which is Erev Tisha B'Av, we are bringing in Devir Bar-Gal. Devir Bar-Gal will guide you around Jewish Shanghai if you happen to be in Shanghai. And the story of Jewish Shanghai and the impact that the Babylonian Jews, the Russian Jews, and then many of the Holocaust Jews had had on building Shanghai from a little bit of a cesspool to what you see now, which is this magnificent city, is due to the Jewish presence there. It is a fascinating story. He tells it beautifully, and I invite you also for free to join us at 5:30 on, 5 o'clock on July 31st, Monday. So pick up a brochure, and about 6 months ago, Larry Winterman said to me, "What do you think about bringing in David Horowitz?" And I said, "We can't get David Horowitz to come talk." And Larry said, "This is Aspen. Of course we can get him to come talk." And we have been blessed with his presence. And I'd like you to welcome Larry Winterman to come up and give him a proper introduction. Thank you.
Alan told me to speak clearly into the microphone, so I hope I'm doing that. Actually, Alan said, "Do you think we can get David Horowitz to come to Aspen?" And I met David Horowitz about 10 years ago at the annual event that he does in Palm Beach for the David Horowitz Freedom Center. And that's how I was able to give him a call and get him to come here. David was a... Okay, David. Is that better? Okay. So David grew up in the 50s as a red diaper baby. His parents were card-carrying communists, and and was a radical leftist throughout that time frame until he had an epiphany sometime late into the 70s. David was the managing editor of Ramparts magazine. During that time period, he and his partner had written over 20 books, and some of them were New York Times bestsellers. His current book is The Big Agenda, which which is available now through the courtesy of Bob Jenkins. And so you can get that book, and he's got over 20 books that he sells. Currently, David, besides writing books, which he does, writing books and pamphlets, is the CEO of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and they fight against radical Islam. They fight free speech, free enterprise, truth, justice, and the American way. So that's the brief introduction, and let me present David Horowitz. Is that close enough?
It's on. Thanks, Larry. First of all, I want to say I admire you all for wanting to do anything serious in this environment. Secondly, this is my wife, my lovely wife, April's first time in Aspen. She's fallen in love with your town. Finally, I want to apologize in advance to anybody who strayed into this hall who is not is of a different persuasion from what I am going to be saying here. We live in very ugly political times. It's a tragedy for our country and for all the people in the world who depend on us to defend freedom, that our country is so divided. And otherwise, people I previously thought were very highly intelligent are off their rockers. I'm going to try to give some insight into that. And as I warn you all that I speak pretty bluntly. Our country has it's really an unofficial motto, but it's on our money, so it's pretty official. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. because we were, and I will return to this a little later in my talk, we were formed as a nation by people from very diverse backgrounds, different countries. And in those countries were probably at war with each other. So the founders created a constitutional framework and where we would resolve our differences by votes. And therefore we've had what is really a sacred political tradition of the presidential honeymoon, where we recognize that campaigns are divisive by nature. People say very harsh things and extreme things, and that's on both sides, and completely unhinged and ungrounded things, because the prize of the presidency is so important. So the presidential honeymoon functions as a way of, again, reminding us, out of many one, that in the end, we're one nation, and that those of us who are disappointed in the election get to have another election in 4 years and can right the wrongs that we perceive have taken place. According to the Gallup organization, the average presidential honeymoon lasts 7 months. Donald Trump didn't get 7 seconds. They were talking about impeaching him on the day one of his presidency. The presidential honeymoon, during those 7 months, the president gets to put his team in place, get them confirmed by the Senate, and to begin his agenda. And then the normal political conflicts resume. Trump didn't get a confirmation hearings, he got a witch hunt. I'll just pick one, Jeff Sessions, somebody I've known for 20 years, probably the most decent, among the 5 or 6 most decent human beings in the United States Senate, who, if you look at his actual record, he was the Attorney General in a deep South state, Alabama. He prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan. He sent a Klan leader to his death for a racial murder, and he desegregated the schools. In other words, a supporter of civil rights. Yet Schumer and Elizabeth Warren and Richard Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal, and all of the Democrats, without dissent, call him a racist, just to defeat and discredit him. That is the ugliness. I mean, that just captured the ugliness of what Donald Trump had to confront as president, or just beginning his presidency. There was and the Democrats, to a man and woman, had decided that their approach to the new presidency was going to be called resistance. It is not the function of an opposition party in a democracy to resist a duly elected president. That's not the function. You can do other things, but being a resistance, and what that means in effect is that the Democratic Party has decided to sabotage the Trump presidency. And then we see this relentless nonsense about Russia. And to me, as somebody who grew up in the McCarthy era and has watched the Democratic Party basically declare moral equivalence between the communist empire and the United States at one point. It's just remarkable to see all these Russophobes on the Democratic side of the aisle. But what the function of all this Russia nonsense is, because there's no evidence at all. I mean, it's absurd. The one thing you know about Trump is he has a deep patriotic feeling. I mean, it's something, when I watched Trump in the primaries, of course, like a lot of people, I was nervous about him. He's a little undisciplined, a lot pugnacious and so forth. But I knew certain things about him. One was that he was a patriot. You can see interviews with him going back 30 years on YouTube. when they ask him if he'll run for president. And he says he's not a politician, but the country is in trouble. And if it gets in serious trouble, he's going to run. And you knew about him also that his reputation was important for him. So I knew that. How do you know that his reputation is important? Because he puts his name on everything that he creates. So I knew that he was going to keep those promises when lots of people, including people on the right, were saying he's not going to keep any of the promises. There was a seminal moment in the debates where Trump turned, there was like 50 or 70 million people watching, and he turns to the television cameras, addressing the television audience, and says, "You have to understand, Hillary has tremendous hatred in her heart." And what was he referring to? He was referring to her statement that his supporters belong in a basket of deplorables and irredeemables, that is, you're damned. And she identified who's in that basket. Racist, sexist, homophobes, Islamophobes, xenophobes, you name it, she said. And Trump had lifted them up. All of these terms, racist, we live in the most tolerant and inclusive society on the face of this earth. So racists can't even poke their heads up without being smashed down. If the Ku Klux Klan was left of it as a demonstration, there was one recently somewhere, there are 5 Klansmen and 1,000 protesters. That's the country that we live in. So to use the term racist is to just drum you out of decent society. Nobody should listen to you, nobody should talk to you. That's why they attacked Jeff Sessions so unfairly as a racist. And the same is true with sexist, homophobe, and xenophobe, and Islamophobe. It's to shut down a point of view that disagrees with yours. But the fact is, there's probably not a conservative in this country or a Republican who's been in an argument with a so-called liberal over an argument over policy, it could be health care, it could be anything, who has not been called a racist, sexist, homophobe. It's the unfortunate language of the Democratic Party. It's their chief weapon, which is character assassination. That's the way I look at it. And I'm speaking as somebody who marched to support Harry Truman's civil rights. He desegregated the civil service in 1948. But I've been called a racist up and down the web for disagreeing. I was actually Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut tried to tar and feather Jeff Sessions by associating him with me. I gave him an award. Actually, the award is named after Annie Taylor, who was the first woman to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and survive. I'm not kidding. Because of this, whenever I see a Republican square off against a Democrat, it looks to me like Godzilla versus Bambi. And why is that? And because the Democrat is going to call the Republican a racist, a sexist, a homophobe. And the Republican will call the Democrat a liberal. What are Democrats liberal about except spending other people's money, hard drugs, sex, coddling criminals, and finding excuses for our enemies? So we're in what I call a civil war situation, which is how this talk was organized. Now, it's not going to be, well, there already have been people killed, and there will be more, hopefully not too many, but I'm not that hopeful. But it will not be a civil war like the Civil War, and the reason is the federal government is so powerful today that there's no rebel force that would last 10 seconds if it confronted the US Army, the US military, and so forth. So what it's really a war over is control of the federal government. And I call this a civil war because of the way the Democrats approach Republicans and denounce them, damn them, really. And I call it the Democrats' second secession. Actually, there was one other president who, when he was elected, was faced with a resistance and a determination to sabotage his presidency, and that was Abraham Lincoln, who was founder, or whatever, the Republican Party. So why do Democrats talk this way? Well, the Democratic Party, in my view, has been taken over by the political left. The candidate, the 2016 candidate of the Democratic Party would have been Bernie Sanders if Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Donna Brazile hadn't fixed the primaries. Bernie Sanders is the face of the Democratic Party. That's where the troops are. That's where, I mean, Chuck Schumer is much more intelligent than he's coming across these days, and that's because he's looking over his left shoulder at the Bernie Sanders forces. And who is Bernie Sanders? He's a lifelong communist. He's a supporter. He chose to have his honeymoon in Moscow at the height of the Soviet Empire, for crying out tears. All he's done all his life is support communist causes. And when he says Denmark is his model. No, it isn't. It's Cuba. It was Russia during the height of the Cold War. That's who Bernie Sanders is. And all he can say is tax the rich, give everything away free. Of course, nothing is free, not in this life. Tax the way. I'm on his, I'm a follow his Twitter feed. And that's all he ever says, over and over again. So Bernie Sanders is the heart and soul right now of the Democratic Party. And they have two Sandersites, although one of them actually supported Hillary. I think Perez did. Lunatic leftist, Keith Ellison, candidate of the Muslim Brotherhood, for crying out tears. As an adult, that is until he was like 30, he was a raving anti-Semitic, anti-white racist, anti-American agent for Louis Farrakhan, the biggest racist in the country. That's who Keith Ellison, those are the two heads of the Democratic Party today, which I think is tragic for the country, absolutely tragic. I am waiting for Democrats to wake up and reject them. Why do progressives, that's, every term, the left is brilliant at politics. And everybody who's a conservative in this room should copy them. Don't become like them, but watch what they do. So all the words, liberal, we hated liberals. I was part of the anti-war movement, the New Left, all of them are now in the Democratic Party. We hated liberals because they were liberal. Progressive. There's nothing progressive about having politics and a program which hasn't had a new idea since 1848. It's socialism. What is the Democratic Party about today? It's redistribution. Obamacare. It's not about health care, it's about insurance, and it's about redistribution of income, and that's why it doesn't work. It was to snooker young people who are struggling but are healthy into financing older people like us who are not healthy and have money. I mean, it's ridiculous. And anyway, that's what the Democratic Party does. But why do they do this? It's because progressives believe that over the rainbow, there's this wonderful future where there's no racism, no sexism, no homophobia, no Islamophobia, no war, no poverty. It used to be called communism. Then it was socialism, now it's called social justice. This is the vision. Well, if you actually believe, because America is a very wealthy country if you look at it, that you can feed everybody, give everybody a free education, feed everybody, it's a right, health care is a right. What it is a right to stick your hands in somebody else's pocket and subsidize yourself. That's what it is. That's what that means. If you really believe that you could have a world where everybody's taken care of, and there's no conflicts, what crime would you not commit, and what lie would you not tell? Or if you can't commit the crime, what crime would you not support? And that's why, I mean, one of the leaders of the Women's March, Razmia Odeh, is a terrorist. She's convicted. She blew up a supermarket, killed 2 students, spent 10 years in jail, and then was released in one of the idiotic prisoner exchanges the Israelis seem compelled to do all the time. She's the hero of the Women's March. Anyway, so how is it that we have a civil war? You have a civil war, we look back to the big one, when you have completely irreconcilable worldviews. Freedom and slavery can't live together. There's got to be a war. If you look at our founding, and go back to this e pluribus unum, the idea is this, and it's, you know, the Constitution doesn't use the word white or black, male or female. They're not in the Constitution. Why? Because with the founders' idea, they were, and I have to say, this country could only have been founded by Protestants. And that's because what the Protestant idea was that there can't be a human institution that's a mediation between God and the individual. The individual relates directly to God. That's the Protestant idea. And so that's enshrined in our founding, that all men are created equal by the Creator and are equal in the eyes of the Creator. And therefore government cannot treat them unequally. That is the revolutionary idea on which this country was founded. Therefore, we, as a country that was created by people who came from all different countries, different languages, different religions, the idea was, we don't judge you by your origins. We judge you on your merits. The individuals are equal before the law. We look at the individual, not the group that you came from. That's the fundamental American idea. And the Democratic Party today is driven, and of course, it's a big party. And these are generalizations that I've made, and I understand that there are very decent people in the Democratic Party. But the ideology of the Democratic Party today is called identity politics. And if you are a leftist, you actually understand, or you describe this as cultural Marxism. And what does that mean? Well, Marx had this false idea that the world is divided into oppressors and oppressed. And he had the idea that democracies, capitalist democracies, were also oppressors and oppressed. If you remember the opening of the Communist Manifesto, the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle, and then he identifies them. There were feudal lords and serfs, there were slave owners and slaves, and so forth. And in capitalism, there were wage slaves. The proletariat class is wage slaves. So it's that model. It was wrong when he said it. 100 million people have been killed in its name. It's still wrong. And what the left has done is to extend this model of the oppressor and the oppressed to race. It's not only, it's class, race, gender, sexual orientation. everywhere they look, they see oppression. I mean, let's take the most, the hardest case, if you will, black people. If America, the word oppression, let's just sort of parse that. If you find the heat oppressive, when you use that term, oppression, the oppressive heat, see a big exodus from this country of black people? No, on the contrary, you see Haitians risking their lives to get here. Why? To be oppressed? No, because in America, a Haitian, despite the fact, of course there are bigots around, there's always going to be bigots, but in America, a Haitian, and remember that Haiti has been a free country run by black people for over 200 years. But a Haitian in America has more rights, more privileges, and more opportunities than any Haitian in Haiti. That's just the reality. That's the reality we live in. But if you look at the Democratic Party platform, few people read platforms, but if you write a book like I had to write about Trump, you read the platforms. They talk about being dedicated to eliminating systemic racism in America. There is no systemic racism in America. There can't be. Why? Because we outlawed it in 1964 and 65 with the Civil Rights Acts. You can't discriminate. No institution can discriminate against people. Why do they invent institutional racism? Because there are no racists around. I mean, there are racists, but they have to be underground. If they stick their heads up, everybody jumps on them and they discredit themselves. Another example. One of the things Hillary ran on with big things in the campaign and I never understood why electing Hillary as the first woman president was going to be good for women. I mean, pick a better role model. Remember, she ran on the gender wage gap. Women make 21 cents less on the dollar than men. No, they don't. In 1963, a male-dominated Congress passed the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, 1963. It's illegal to pay women less for the same work and the same skills and the same job experience as men. You just can't do it. Also, there's an obvious, easy reason why it doesn't exist. Because if it did, then a smart employer would fire all his male employees, hire women, and increase his profits more than probably he's making. I mean, it wouldn't be exactly 21%, but it would be something with 10%. It doesn't happen because it isn't true. And even the New York Times recently recognized this with an article that the reason for the gap, the way they get the gap is you take all the women and all the men, and you add up their salaries and then divide them by the number of men and women. You don't look at individual cases. But the source of the gender wage gap is children. So women, when they have children, they take time out of the labor force. They look for jobs that have flex time, which are not as high paying as men. Not as men, as high paying as the job, like being an engineer or whatever. Anyway, to really succeed in this world, you probably have to work 60 or 70 hours a week. Anyway, enough of this. Let me encapsulate the whole thing with the phrase people of color. The left is very good, undocumented workers. What, they lost their documents? I mean, it's just a subterfuge. It's Orwellian. It's really a totalitarian abuse of language, undocumented. And they have a phrase in the race area too, which is people of color. That's not English. I mean, when I first heard that, I just went nuts. Because I went nuts when I was a young man because Elvis Presley had a song called Love Me Tender, when it's Love Me Tenderly. So I'm peculiar that way. Do we say, oh, I'm going to go out and buy a television of color? Of course, if you say colored person, that's racist. So it's a completely ideological invention, people of color. What's its purpose? Well, look at Mexico. It has two main ethnic groups, the descendants of the Spanish conquistadors, who slaughtered the indigenous Indians, and the descendants of the indigenous Indians, the ones that, you know, the survivors of the indigenous Indians. So you have the oppressor class, the conquistadors, and the oppressed, the indigenous Indians. But when they cross the border into the United States, they're both people of color, therefore oppressed, therefore deserving certain sensitivities, certain privileges, and a lot of slack. Well, Maharajas in India, they're also people of color. Islamic beheaders in Iraq and Syria, they're also people of color. In fact, the whole world is people of color, except guess who? Who's the oppressors? Who are the bad guys? Well, looking around this room, it's us. The Democratic Party is consumed by an anti-American ideology, a racist ideology. That's what this is. This is racism, pure and simple. You judge people on the basis of their skin color, their ethnicity, their place of origin. That is racist, and it's un-American. It's anti-American. Anti-American is what it is. And that's why this conflict is so irreconcilable. When the Democratic Party goes out to support voter fraud, it does it in the name of, this is racism by Republicans. They're suppressing votes. How is it suppressing votes to ask for an ID if the government will supply it to anybody who wants it, which they do? You have to have, you can't get food stamps without an ID. So it's a completely invented, concocted reason for preventing a survey, or for preventing voter fraud, and for preventing a survey of what is the extent of voter fraud. You know, Trump is called a liar all the time. He's a piker compared to Obama. Obama lied about really big things. You know, you can keep your doctor if you like him. You can keep your plan if you like it. We're going to lower your health care costs. Al-Qaeda's on the run. That's how he got elected in 2012. Osama bin Laden is dead. That was true. Al-Qaeda's on the run. That was completely false. So what are Trump's lies? Well, one of his big lies, supposedly, is his claim that he lost the popular vote to Hillary because of illegal voter fraud. Now, Trump is a big exaggerator because he's a salesman. He's very good at it, too. Otherwise, he wouldn't be president. But the entire media, every anti-never-Trumper, the conservative never-Trumpers, they all call him a liar because he said that he lost because of voter fraud. How do they know? First of all, Trump has to know that he's not telling the truth to be a liar. But how do the people who are calling him a liar know that there weren't 2 or 3 million fraudulent votes? We know that there are several million people who are registered to vote in 2 states. We also know there are several million illegal aliens here who are also registered. Did they vote? Nobody knows because there's never been a survey. And you look at the war on the Trump's election commission, this is the first attempt to actually find out what the extent of the voter fraud is. And by the way, to affect the presidential election, it doesn't have to be that large. I mean, it would for Trump's exaggeration, if it's an exaggeration about the popular vote. But but the vote margins can be very narrow in a precinct or in a state. I know I distracted myself on that, but I can't resist. Here's the thing. I'm actually going to close with this, because people so underestimate what Trump is doing and who he is. His inaugural address, and this gets me really steamed. It was denounced. I said it was the worst inaugural address, denounced and so forth. And the reason was that he referred to the carnage in our inner cities. And one of the problems that Republicans have is they're too damn polite. Name me one Republican elected official who, on a platform in front of a television audience of 20 million people, or 50 million, whatever it was, would look Hillary Clinton in the eye and say, "You are a liar and a crook," when she is both. Name me one. There is none. So here's the Democratic Party, which gets 90% of the black vote and pretends to be a champion of the marginalized and oppressed and the voiceless, controls every significant sized inner city in America, 100%, and has for 50 to 100 years. Every killing field, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Ferguson, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., every one of them, every killing field, every school system which fails to teach 40 to 50% of the kids who go there. Every year, year in and year out, 40% dropout rates, 40% of the graduates in these inner city schools functionally illiterate, 100% the fault of the Democratic Party insofar as it can be affected, and Republicans too polite to mention it. So Trump finally did. And they attacked him for being a racist, for running down the inner city by saying there's carnage going on there. You're more likely to be killed by a bullet in Chicago than in Iraq. I mean, I think Spike Lee even made a movie like that, about that. It's bizarre, political scene this way. So to go back, for people who doubt that Trump is a serious person with a serious contribution to make to this country, just consider this inaugural address that was so dismissed because of the reference to the carnage in the inner cities. What he did was he posed to the racist, the Democratic Party's racist identity politics, the American idea, the e pluribus unum idea. What he said was, if we are loyal to our country, we can learn to be loyal to each other. If you have patriotism in your heart, there will be no room for prejudice. And he said, we are black and brown and white, but we all bleed patriot red. That was the message that's been trampled on by all this, the Russia crap, the white nationalist crap, all of this stuff, the anti-Semitism crap. It's unbelievable. This country is now at a war for its soul. I believe there are people in the Democratic Party who understand more than they're saying. I can put it that way. Who have better heads than they're showing now. But the chorus is so huge. The war against Trump is so pervasive and so hysterical that I don't know what the outcome is going to be. And I think that's worrisome, should be worrisome for all of us. Thank you.
David. It's on? Thank you, David. I'd like to say a couple things first. Number one is we're having a private dinner afterwards with David, and there's room for 2 more couples at $500 per couple. See Alan and I when we're done. And also on a lot of the chairs, you'll see the David Horowitz Freedom Center brochures. There's envelopes in them. Please consider putting a check in those envelopes and sending them in to the David Horowitz Freedom Center, particularly if you enjoyed what David Horowitz stands for and what he had to say tonight. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. How does the average guy, take it please, how does the average guy fight this war? How do we try and regain the universities, the schools, the media, Hollywood, etc.?
I think I was going to say, I think the universities are lost. I've written 5 books about universities. It's very, very sad what's happened. The universities are the experimental laboratories of the left, and the left controls them. I mean, I was when Milo Yiannopoulos they created a riot at Berkeley to stop him from speaking. They just $100,000 worth of damage, all encouraged by the administration there, whose president is, what's her name? Janet Napolitano was the head of the Department of Homeland Security. The police stood by, nobody was arrested. Somebody was sent to the hospital, and they practically destroyed, $100,000 worth of damage. So this is all encouraged by administrations, unfortunately. We have a terror front on our campuses, led by the Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a Hamas organization. Just as propaganda for Hamas, the Muslim Students Association, which is a Muslim-like SJP, is a Muslim Brotherhood front, which harasses. There's an epidemic of anti-Semitic attacks on Jewish students, and it comes because the entire political left is behind them. And, it's paid for by taxpayers, but it's also paid for directly by Hamas through American Muslims for Palestine. I do a lot of work in this area. I've spoken on a lot of campuses, and I conduct campaigns, so I'm speaking from an awful lot of experience. I think it's terrible, and it's really very worrying. How many people know the name Linda Sarsour? Yeah, well, this is a good example. I mean, this is a Jew-hating, Hamas-supporting propagandist for the terrorists, who was co-chair of the Women's March and supported by the Democratic Party. I think she's a little crossed the line. That's coming back to bite her by calling for a jihad against Trump. But, it's pretty understandable in the present climate that somebody would make that, or you wouldn't even know that that's going to be a mistake. So I think you have to fight at every level. The K-12 schools are now indoctrination centers. It's unbelievable what goes on. I'm about to put up a website called Stop K-12 Indoctrination. I have my website, so you go to frontpagemagazine.com, frontpagemag.com, you can see a lot of our work. The universities now are one-party states. I wrote a book called One Party Classroom about them. I studied 80 course plans, over 170 courses in 12 major universities. And I mean, this would shock anybody who went to school at least 30 or 40 years ago. But there are courses like at UC Santa Cruz. This is in the school catalog. This is a public university paid for by taxpayers. The purpose of this seminar is to teach how to organize a revolution that is anti-capitalist and anti-racist. That's not a college course. It's supposed to be inquiry. Why? Anyway, so I was invited by the college Republicans to follow Milo. And if you don't know Milo Yiannopoulos, you should. I actually have two. I have a speech that he gave that's on my website. And then he did a 45-minute interview with NPR, which they suppressed. They didn't publish the interview because he was very serious in the interview. But I was supposed to follow Milo, and I was on had a phone call with the Vice Chancellor Sutton and the chief of the campus police. And they had told the kids, Horowitz can only speak at 1 o'clock, which is when afternoon classes begin, so nobody would come. And he can only speak a mile away from campus. They have a facility a mile away from campus. And then the police chief said, he said, and you can announce the event, but you can't tell its location. I'm not making this up. And what the police chief is trying to do, and then they told the students that they would have to pay $2,000 for the room a mile away from campus, and $6,000 for the security, lest if the left was going to attack us. I told the vice chancellor, I said, you're paying this police chief too much. He wants these kids to do his job. Anyway, all they care about is bad publicity. They have no principles. It's gross. Anyway, so I think you have to fight at every level, whatever it is. You have to just stand up for reason and not be afraid. And I never ask people to do what they don't feel able to do, but you really have to be prepared to be called a racist if you're going to defend the simple truth. So I give you an example. Senator Blumenthal, in the confirmation hearings, tax sessions because he got an award from me, and to show what a terrible person I was, he quoted a quote of mine saying, the reason there are so many black people in prison is because so many black people commit crimes, or too many black people commit crimes. 40% of the violent crimes in this country are committed by blacks. There's all kinds of reasons, and the Democratic Party's idiotic welfare programs, which drove fathers out of the homes, is one of the big problems. But that's the reality. That's the reality. So you have to stand up for the truth and be willing to take the hits.
So would you recommend that people post things on Facebook and get on Twitter and talk to their friends? You don't have to say it yourself. I mean, there's a ton of really good sites, a lot of good people out there on the web. Just get involved. But I think this area is a big distraction. Anyway, just to answer your question. Alan, would you like to ask something, and then we can open it up to the audience? Okay, so.
You got this?
Please make sure it's a question and nice and loud.
Mr. Horowitz, what caused your epiphany to become a conservative?
I've written a book, an autobiography called Radical Son, which tells it, but in brief, I believed our propaganda. I thought the police were racist. I thought the Black Panther Party was the vanguard of the revolution. They were brave and standing up to police. I raised a lot of money and bought a church, a Baptist church in East Oakland that had been it was a white Baptist church, and it was completely black neighborhood, and so they wanted to sell. I created a tax-exempt foundation to run what I called it the Oakland Community Learning Center. Very naive of me. And I recruited. I was running the largest magazine of the New Left, Ramparts. I recruited my bookkeeper, Betty Van Patter, who was 42 at the time and mother of 3 children, to do the books for this 501c3 I had created. And in December 1974, she disappeared, and by the time the police fished her body out of San Francisco Bay, I knew that the Panthers had killed her. I was interviewed by the police, and I learned a lot. It's all in this book I wrote about, it's very hard for individuals to dispose of bodies, but if you have an organization and you have safe houses and so forth and so on. So I knew they had killed her, and this happened in, her body was discovered in February 1975. If you'll recall, in April, there had been an election in November, and the Watergate Democrats had come in. And the first thing they did was to cut off aid to the South Vietnamese regime. And the communists, the regime fell in April 1975, 2 months after this. And the communists proceeded to slaughter in Vietnam and Cambodia 2.5 million people. There wasn't a single protest by the left, organized, demonstration or anything. And I knew that I had been seduced by wonderful sounding ideas, but this was an evil movement. And I dedicated the rest of my life to fighting it. And that's kind of what you hear tonight.
David, I wonder if you could address the elephant in the room, if you will, which is the palpable frustration that many Republicans have about the fact that we're not draining the swamp and the case is not being made for the agenda that Republicans were elected on.
I think the answer is...
You got the...
The Republicans are individualists. They're all marching to the tune of their own drummers. They're individualists. They march to the tune of their own drummers. They want to compromise. That's the American way. They're just blind. I mean, it's just terrible. I think Trump's biggest problem is the Republican Party. I've said many times, and way before this election, that Paul Ryan he may be a brilliant wonk, but he hasn't got a political brain cell. They don't understand that it's a battle and it's a war, and there are no Marquess of Queensberry rules that certainly not the Democrats are observing.
But Trump has the bully pulpit, and he doesn't seem to be using it on the issues that matter.
Of course he is. He's using it through Twitter. As many public figures who want him to, who say that to have people have voting IDs so you know they didn't vote 65 times, calling that voter suppression, the same number of people are saying, get off the Twitter. The Twitter is bad. Twitter is the way he communicates.
I have no problem with Twitter. I just wish he would use it more on the issues that matter to us.
There's a war going on. He has to defeat this way. Look, you've got this. I mean, what he has revealed, or what this whole thing has revealed, is how big the swamp is and how corrupt our institutions are. We've had 2 attorney generals in a row under Obama who should be in jail for obstruction of justice alone. We have an FBI director, Comey, who should be in jail, who single-handedly tried to manipulate that election for himself. I mean, otherwise you can't understand. I mean, he could have tried to just elect Hillary, which he did, by giving her a pass. But then he seems to have sabotaged her. So who is this guy? Then you have appointed as a special prosecutor by idiot Republicans, Mueller. Comey Comey is his protege, for crying out tears. And he's appointed all Democrats to be his special prosecutors. Well, I actually read a good book by Chris Matthews, who's lost his mind since writing it, called Nixon and Kennedy. It's a really interesting book, and in it he shows how Kennedy had this vendetta against Nixon, and 11 of the 12 prosecutors in the special prosecutor's office had worked for the Kennedys. And everybody says, oh, Watergate, that's great. No, it isn't. No, it wasn't. There were 2 wars going on at the time, one in the Middle East. And the Democrats jeopardized those wars by going after Nixon over a third-rate burglary. That's what it was. Nothing.
But imagine if you went around the country and made the case as Obama did, if you like your health care, you can keep it. Imagine if he did that, that now 60% of the country favor Obamacare, keeping it in some way. If he were out there making the case against it, as the Republicans did for 7 years, maybe we'd have an easier time passing it.
I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith in Republicans' ability to fight.
Have some water.
I need some oxygen.
Hi, sir. Could you predict what American society will look like in about 30 years with the youth?
Look, I've never been able to have my head control my heart. So I'm an optimist. I think we can win this fight. That's just my gut instinct.
Thank you.
But I can't defend that with my head. So I don't see the future.
Hi, thank you. I was not born in this country. And many years ago, I didn't understand the politics of this country either, but I saw a movie. And the most important line in the movie, I don't even know what it was about, was follow the money. And I
It was about Watergate.
Yeah. So it was supposed to be a joke. But anyway, I wonder how can movements that are so wrong and are as wrong can be so successful?
Because it's all about emotions. That's the thing Republicans don't. Republicans think if you put up a pie chart and talk like an accountant, you can persuade people. It's all about emotions. The core national myth that we have is the myth of the underdog who overcomes adversity. After all, we were 13 little colonies. We defeated the greatest empire in the world. It's a country of individualists. So the left has totally exploited that myth. All I talk about, the vulnerable, the voiceless, and you have all these Republicans who won't point out that they rule, as I said, the inner cities where you have the voiceless and the marginalized are there. So they have a very seductive, what do you call it, mating call.
Yeah, sorry, I hear what you're saying, but going back to the first part of my non-question, follow the money. This has to be backed by enormous amounts of money.
Soros.
And
Soros. I did a whole book on Soros.
Furthermore, like just the example of BDS, I recently found out that BDS is supported by Qatar. And
by Qatar, but also by Hamas directly, AMP.
Same difference.
Yes, that's exactly right. But we know where the money comes. There is no George Soros of the right. Just isn't. And he has organized a coalition of billionaires. And that's where the money's coming from. He owns the Democratic Party.
I've thought long and hard how to switch the fundamentals of what's going on, and I want you to comment on this, if you would, please. The Constitution is what made this country great. A lot of countries have vast resources and hardworking people. It's the Constitution. Nobody in the school system is now being educated in the Constitution in our history.
On the contrary, They're being educated. The Constitution was written by slave owners and property holders to keep the marginalized and the oppressed down. They're being taught communist version of American history, totally. The biggest, I think it sold over 1 million copies, is The People's History of the United States. And like Matt Damon made a whole series out of it. Or Oliver Stone did a whole series on television. It was the communist claptrap I read as a kid. I mean, I knew, you know, our culture is gone. We have lost the culture war. And, you know, our champion now is Milo Yiannopoulos. You watch him in action. Watch him in action. He's the only one who confronts them.
Mr. Horowitz, I just wondered, what do you make of President Trump's comments on Sessions that he wouldn't have hired him had he known?
I got called by BuzzFeed today.
Yeah.
I said, oh, the bad guys. My friend. I think that I understand what Sessions did. I think that in terms of the Constitution and whatever the legal guidelines of the Justice Department, what he did was right, and I understand why a man like that would do it. But from the political point of view, it was wrong. He you know, when Jack Kennedy got, you know, it's wonderful how, and Jack Kennedy is a Reagan conservative. Jack Kennedy, anyway. If you want to see how far left the Democratic Party has slid, you just look at Jack Kennedy. He was a militant anti-communist, which would have made him a militant anti-radical Islamist today. He was a hawk. He had the largest peacetime military buildup in history. He was for a capital gains tax cut and a balanced budget, an extreme right-winger in today's terms. That's who John Kennedy was. And I forgot what you asked, so I... Oh, so what Sessions did, I understand, but he was wrong. Kennedy appointed his brother to protect his back. Now, that's Sessions' main task in a political sense, is to protect Trump's back. But Sessions is a traditional conservative. I mean, I think it's amazing that he supported Trump from the beginning. But I understand how he made this mistake. Horrible mistake to recuse himself. For what? For nothing. Because at a cocktail reception, he said hello to the Russian ambassador? Just terrible mistake.
You characterized the current state of the country as dominated by an evil force. All the institutions, the universities, government agencies.
The culture is.
The culture. And you're advocating a war against that evil force. What if you win? Describe how the transition will be conducted.
Well, when I went to college in the 50s. I was a Marxist. I never knew the politics of my professors. They were actual liberals in a meaningful sense of the word. And they stressed the importance of process. And I think that has to be restored. As I say, I've written 5 books about the university. I devised an academic Bill of Rights, which was based on the most famous academic freedom statement of the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, in 1915. It created the modern research university, which is built on scientific principles. And the AAUP attacked me as Torquemada, fascist, whatever, thought controller. And all I said was there should be 2 sides to any controversial question presented in a fair-minded way. That was my Bill of Rights. So things are really bad. People don't realize how bad they are. I can't go to a college campus without bodyguards.
Horowitz, I've got a 2-part question. The first one, seems to me that the solution currently at certainly the Senate level actually get the agenda through is to get rid of the filibuster. And so I want you to comment on what's the likelihood that there'll be enough character in McConnell and the others to get rid of the filibuster, because it's not an original constitutional concept. And secondly, you commented that there were several Democrats you knew of who were, quote, decent characters. At what point does this character actually arise and they stand up and identify what as against?
To answer your second question, I've been waiting for that to happen for 30 years, so I'm not optimistic.
So there is no character.
I'm not optimistic. And what's the first part of your filibuster? Yeah, the filibuster actually is a very good idea, because the filibuster, what the founders were worried about was the passions. They had this idea of the passions and the interests. And you see that whole nations get swept up in incredibly destructive passions. So the trick is, how do you cool them off? And you cool them off by protecting the minority, which is what the filibuster does. It prevents Congress from doing really stupid things, although they do them all the time anyway. But in this political situation, yeah. So I'm torn over that. I think they have to do something like that.
Do you think they...
See, for me, I mean, the Republicans never fought Obamacare the way it needs to be fought. It's an attack on freedom, on individual freedom. What the hell the government tells you takes control of your life? Healthcare, first of all your information, of course they have, but then they tell you what kind of insurance package you can have. And of course there are death panels, as we can see with the Guard case in England. Of course, if the government is the monopoly controller, which is what every Democrat wants, it's called single payer, which is communism, then of course the government is going to ration the services, because there's always scarcity. There's always choices that have to be made. So much better to leave it to individual initiative. Individuals find their solutions. People come up, and, you know, if you let insurance companies actually compete, they'll be wanting customers and will come up with better plans. Horrible thing, Obamacare. It is, you know, it's socialist, it's destructive, and it's a frontal assault on individual freedom. But the Republicans never fought it that way. So there are lots of Republicans in the Congress who want to just fix it. It can't be fixed. If the government tells you what kind of health, first of all, anyway, go on. I'm getting...
Okay, Mr. Horowitz.
Let's have one more question.
I wonder if you could comment on the fact that Jews are overwhelmingly liberal, and
since we have a conservative Reform rabbi here, let me say, there's a saying that Reform Judaism is a Democratic Party with holidays. These are deracinated Jews. The Orthodox Jews are conservatives.
Yes.
People need to find a meaning in life. The religion fulfilled that. And I actually wrote a whole book about this, but anyway, fulfilled that by promising that all of the questions that we have, all the uncertainties, whether it's all meaningless or not, will be resolved on the other side. That was a healthy way to do it. But alongside of that, and going back to the Pelagian heresy, going back to the Tower of Babel, there were people who found meaning in life, not through a divinity that's going to sort things out later, but for creating a ladder to heaven, creating heaven on earth. That's the Pelagian heresy. So you have all these Jews who are not very religious, but their religion is progressivism, socialism, communism, social justice. That's the religion of those Jews. To the extent to which they are going to watch their, the country that has, Israel go, they're enabling the destruction of the state of Israel.
Thank you very much.
How can you, I'm going to be on a panel, this is true, there's a thing called Politicon. I don't know who the organizers are, but I can tell you they're leftists. So I'm on a panel with 4 people, including Jen Psaki, if you remember her. She was the communications director, State Department. Tom Viator, who was in the Obama White House. Sally Cohn, who's just an idiot leftist. 4-1, that's what they call fair. And they all support the Iran deal. The Iran deal is treason. Obama took America's worst enemy. Only the Iranians have killed thousands of Americans. Their leaders chant, of course, death to Israel, but also death to America. They're lunatic Nazis. John Kerry's family is married into the ruling elite in Tehran. Nobody mentions it. Okay, we're going to give this guy a path to nuclear weapons. We're going to turn a blind eye while he develops ballistic missiles, and we're going to give him $200 billion so they can fund their terrorism all over the Middle East and elsewhere in Europe. And nobody, where's the Republican who called Obama a traitor for doing that? If Franklin Roosevelt had given nuclear weapons to Hitler, what would we have called him? And that's what Obama did. Oh, it's just, I think it's a miracle that Trump was elected. It's given me a lot of hope. And I'm watching them try to destroy him. And I think this is the battle of our time.
Mr. Horowitz, we'd like to thank you very much for coming. And I'd just like to say, if you want to really have his insight, and although he said, I speak with my heart, but really I don't want to use my head to think ahead, this book absolutely makes a tremendous effort to call out the agenda that Trump is doing, and you want to really see some insight into how this is happening. It's a fabulous read. I'd recommend it highly. Thank you for being here.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you all for being here. Can you imagine? We've just had this discussion in Aspen, Colorado. Can you imagine this? It's good to hear from both sides. Thank you very much.